fit the meaning of those Hebrew verbs. However, these are a different kind of creature. Unlike creatures that God was bringing into existence before, either through His direct hand or natural processes, these are creatures that are not merely physical or bodily, but are physical and soulish. In other words, the Bible tells us that there are three different kinds of animals that God brought about on the surface of planet Earth. Animals that are body only, animals that are body and soul, and only one species that's body, soul, and spirit. And when he speaks about the coming into existence of these mammals and birds, it uses both the verb asa, which means to manufacture, and the verb bara, to bring something brand new into existence which didn't exist before. The asa, in my opinion, refers to God assembling the bodies of these creatures, and then the bara would be the brand new soul that never existed before. Now, from an English perspective, we would recognize that this soulishness is referring to birds and mammals who are endowed with a capacity of mind, will, and emotions so they can develop some kind of relationship with human beings. And that probably explains why we're able to domesticate birds and mammals, but not other kinds of animals. I mean, I've got two boys, and they've been trying to domesticate certain spiders and snakes, but they're not having any more success than anybody else has had in that attempt. Whereas with the birds and the mammals, you can actually train them to do things that do not pertain to their survival, and they can receive affection and give affection. So we have these sea mammals and birds. And now where people have been confused in attacking the text is on the creatures that are mentioned just before the creation of mankind. And it mentions three different kinds of land mammals that God creates. And with respect to the sea mammals, which are mentioned in the fifth day earlier, I want to point out that these three different kinds of land mammals described in the sixth creation day are not referring to the whole class of land mammals, but rather three kinds of land mammals that God created to coexist with human beings. So the text is ignoring those land mammals that God created before the first sea mammals. Those earlier mammals simply aren't mentioned in the text because those creatures are not those that are designed to cohabit with mankind. Where the insects creep in here is the King James Bible describes one of these kinds of animals created to coexist with mankind as the creatures that creepeth along the ground. But if you look up the Hebrew noun that's used there, it's a subset of the Hebrew noun for nephesh, the soulish creature. So in other words, it's a mammal. It's a land mammal that's short-legged. And what the text is talking about here are three kinds of land mammals that can be categorized as land mammals that you human beings will domesticate. Then there will be the long-legged quadruped mammals that you'll discover are difficult to domesticate, called the wild beasts. And finally, there will be the short-legged mammals, the rodents and the hares. These are the three different kinds of land mammals, and as such, there is no contradiction with the fossil record in terms of the sea mammals that came earlier. And last of all, we have the creation of man, body, soul, and spirit. And if you were to compare what secular anthropology has to say about the bipedal primates, we would recognize that according to the Bible's definition of humanity, they don't qualify. No doubt there were Australopithecines and Homo habilis and Homo erectus type creatures wandering the planet for the last several million years, but as we examine the remains, we see no evidence of spirit expression. They use tools, but other birds and mammals also use tools. There's some evidence that they may have buried their dead, but again, that's not unique to bipedal primates or even primates. Other bird and mammal species likewise do that. It's an expression of the soul, an expression of the loss of the partner is what's taking place. It's not a spirit expression. Religious relics and evidence of an awareness of a moral code of law, that kind of evidence dates back only 8 to 24,000 years, and that date of 8 to 24,000 is consistent with a biblical date for God creating Adam and Eve of somewhere between 10 and 60,000 years ago. That may come as a surprise to those who may have been taught that the universe was created in 4004 BC, October 23rd, 9 a.m., 45th meridian time. And the point there is that only with the publication of the King James translation has this idea that the creation days of Genesis 1 are 6 24-hour periods. If you read the history of the church, you discover that from the early church fathers of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century onward, they recognize that Genesis chapter 1 did not really identify in any concrete way the length of the creation period. They realized from the Hebrew language that those 6 days could be 6 long time periods, or they could be 6 briefer periods. We simply just didn't know based on the language there, but the majority of the early church fathers opted for the interpretation that the Yom of Genesis 1 would have to be a significantly longer period of time than days or weeks or years or even centuries. But with the King James translation, confusion came in. And the confusion came in the sense that this is the first Bible translation attempt of any serious nature of bringing a small vocabulary language into a large vocabulary context. The Hebrew language has only got a few thousand words, period, only a few hundred nouns. The English language is over 2 million nouns. So the problem is that the English reader may not appreciate that in biblical Hebrew there are no words for long periods of time. And I think it's helpful to realize that this is a modern day controversy. It's not a controversy that's been part of the history of the Christian church. But that is the fifth most frequent objection we get. How can anyone give credibility to a religion that teaches that the universe and the earth are only thousands of years old when we have overwhelming scientific evidence that it's billions of years old? Well, first of all, that 4004 BC is based on the assumption there are no gaps in the genealogies. And as any Hebrew scholar will point out, there must be gaps in the genealogies if for no other reason there are names given in Luke and in Matthew that are not found in Genesis 5, where it talks about the history of the patriarchs going from Moses all the way back to Adam and Eve. So clearly there are missing names. Moreover, we realize that the Hebrew word for father can be equally translated grandfather, great-grandfather, and as many great-greats you want to stick in there as you please. That's also true of the Hebrew word for son. You can't make a distinction based on the Hebrew between a son and a great-great-great-great-grandson, for example. And therefore, Hebrew scholars have known for centuries that there are many gaps in the genealogies, and therefore even trying to date the creation of Adam and Eve at best can be done to only about a factor of 10. That's why I say between 10 and 60,000 years ago, we can reasonably expect from the text that we have the creation of Adam and Eve. But that's only good to the last event on the sixth creation day. You want to push it back to the creation of the universe, we recognize we run into the problem that these days of creation are not defined, but we can certainly conclude that they are long periods of time as opposed to 24 hours. 6 consecutive long periods of time. Now, you may say, is that because you're not taking the Bible literally? There's a difference between taking the Bible literally and taking the Bible concretely. Let me give you an example. Jesus of Nazareth in one of his sermons said, "I am the door." Did he mean a door jamb? No, I think everybody in the audience realized that he was using a metaphor. That he was trying to claim to the audience that he was a means by which they could enter through a new kind of spiritual door into something they hadn't experienced before. Now, likewise, we need to realize that there are 3 literal interpretations of the Hebrew word for day: 12 hours, 24 hours, and a long period of time. And then what's important is not to adopt one and reject the other 2, but to look at all 3 and say which one will allow us to take the text literally and consistently. It operates the same way as scientific research, where we've got several different hypotheses laid out on the table. We always choose a hypothesis that's consistent with all the experimental data we have available. And so my response to that is you look at all 66 books of the Bible and try to discern which of those 3 literal interpretations is consistent with all 66 books, and what you discover is there's only one, namely the 6 long periods of time. If you want to get into this in more detail, I've got this all covered in the book. The whole book is devoted to that.